Well, better late than never. We're going to talk about the Doctor Who cards that I like coming out of the precons. Now, full disclosure, I am not actually a fan of the Doctor Who TV series. I just never got into it. But I do know good magic cards when I see them. So today we're going to talk about those cards that I like from the set that are not very specific to the Doctor Who set. There's nothing that's going to be like search for a Time Lord or search for a Doctor card or anything like that because I don't want to have to be forced to play around the entire precon to make those things work in the future. Instead, I want to upgrade my existing decks or build around new decks without having to rely on a bunch of the cards in the first place. So let's get started. So going down the list of cards that were revealed in color order, let's start with the white card that I like coming out of this. Everything Comes to Dust. For 7 white white, you get a sorcery with Convoke. Exile all creatures except those that shared a creature type with the ones that convoke the spell, all artifacts, and all enchantments. And if you've watched my content long enough, you know I like to play a lot of decks where creature type matters. And this card is beautiful in the decks that can support it with white. You're never casting this for the 10 mana. You're going to be convoking it for a one-sided board wipe. My only gripe with this card is the templing on it sucks. And it's because when it was spoiled, it took me like 4 or 5 times to understand what it actually does. It exiles all artifacts, all enchantments, and all creatures that don't share a creature type with the ones that convoke the spell when you cast it. Everything else gets exiled. So if all of your creature types are shared, like a soldier's deck or a vampire deck that shares a white in the color scheme or whatever, all of those are going to stay alive and your opponent's stuff is going to get exiled from the game. And exile is the best way in Commander to get rid of stuff so that way it cannot be brought back with graveyard shenanigans later. Moving on to blue, which is actually going to share the largest amount of cards that I like coming out of this set, we have Autoton Soldier for 4 blue blue, Alien Soldier. You can have it enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except for it's not legendary. It's an artifact in addition, and it has Myriad. I love me some clones, and this one is quite good. For 6 mana, you get to clone anything on the board, including legends, since it ignores the legendary rules. And it also gains Myriad, meaning that if you clone something with an ETB, you're going to go ham with the triggers every time you attack with it. I love it, and I will be copying some really messed up stuff with this card. Next up is Cyber Conversion. For blue blue, you get an instant that turns a creature face down, and it becomes a 2/2 artifact Cyberman creature token. So this card is very simple, but it is so destructive without actually destroying anything. If you got a problem creature in the way, now it's a 2/2 and loses all of its abilities. If you need to pin down a commander, you got it covered with this card. And without the creature actually having morph, you can't flip it back over. So it's stuck as a 2/2 until it hits the yard or goes back to the command zone in the case of a commander. So it can be a really good way to surprise destroy a creature as well, like a Galta or something that's trying to trample you down. In response, you just flip it over and then block and eat it. Then I see Hunted by the Family. For 5 blue blue, you get a sorcery. You choose up to 4 target creatures you don't control. For each of them, the controller faces a villainous choice. The creature becomes a 1/1 white human and loses its abilities, or you get a copy of it. I love some big splashy spells, and this definitely qualifies. You get to either completely neutralize 4 of your biggest threats on the other side of the board, or you get your own copy to level the playing field. So that way you're on an even footing. And I really like that this is kind of a quote unquote theft card without really stealing things. Because, spell table is a thing these days with Commander, and a lot of times people do not like you touching their stuff in the first place. So this is like a theft thing without requiring the handling of somebody else's cards. So it's kind of a win-win for you, and it's a win-win for them if they don't want you messing with their stuff. Starting to sense a theme with the ones I really liked from this. Next is Nanogene Conversion. For 3 and a blue, you get a sorcery. Choose target creature you control. Each other creature becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn, except that it is not legendary. Now, this kind of effect has been in Magic for a long time now. Mirror Weave came out in Shadowmoor, and it's in the same mana value, but it's color locked to blue-white, and it can only hit non-legendary creatures. This thing can actually hit legends and can turn all your stuff into a select legendary creature, including your commander, which can be suitably messed up if you're copying something with an attack trigger, such as a Delina Wild Mage in a blue-red deck. That will be massively chaotic, and it also increases the likelihood that at least a couple of the versions of her going off is going to happen as you swing wide as the coins start getting flipped. It's also got promise with something like the Locust God, where you are already spitting out a bunch of tokens off of it. So using this to make them all into something else could result in a lot of sparks flying with the right creatures on the board to turn them into. The last blue card that I really liked from the set here is Quantum Misalignment. For 4 and a blue sorcery, create a token that's a copy of a creature you control, except for it is not legendary and it has Rebound. So if you haven't got the point yet, I love cloning effects, and this is another variation on Irenicus's Vial Duplication, but it costs one more. But you get a bonus for that extra mana. You get Rebound. For those that don't know, Rebound exiles a spell as it resolves and allows you to cast it a second time at the beginning of your next upkeep for free. That's two clones, legendary or not, for the price of one. Sign me up right now. Moving on, we have the only red card I really liked out of the new stuff, Decaying Time Loop. For 300 red, instant, discard your hand, draw that many cards, and it has Retrace. So this is a reusable wheel effect. Hell yes, my Locust God deck is getting a new wheel effect, and the fact that this one only requires a land discard and does not exile itself to retrace it out of the graveyard, this may very well be my favorite card coming out of the precons because I like wheel effects and love using cards. They get a huge bonus out of playing them. Then comes the only mono green card in my list, Displaced Dinosaurs. This thing is the talk of the Twitter sphere right now. For 5 green, you get a dinosaur that says, as a historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, it turns into a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types, and it's a 7/7 itself. This thing is kind of silly. Every time a historic permanent comes into play, you get a 7/7. Historic permanents that come into play, treasure tokens, glue tokens, food tokens, blood tokens, all of those will come in as 7/7s if this dinosaur is sitting on the board. Sagas also count here, so those will become 7/7s that eventually will die when the counters come off of it. But, it's a good thing there. And then all of your legendaries actually come in buffed. So if they're already not a 7/7, say they're a 2/2, they're going to come in as a 7/7 dinosaur in addition to their other types. And then you still get your legend with their special effects. This thing is going to be kind of silly. And unfortunately, right now, it's a little pricey. I'm hoping that as more of the set gets open, it'll get a little closer to, the $4 or $5 mark, not the $15-ish mark that it's currently sitting at. So we'll move on to the multicolored cards. There's a few of those, starting with Bigger on the Inside. 3 red, green, enchantment, aura, enchant artifact or land. The land taps for 2 of any one color, and then the next spell you cast this turn has Cascade. Now, Cascade can be a polarizing ability. You either love it or you hate it. I'm in the love camp because I love random chaos that the ability can provide. And being able to grant it to any spell in my deck, yes, please. And the great part is this slots into my existing Yidris deck, in which you can already give multiple instances of Cascade to your spells by giving him Double Strike. So then you can actually use this to grant an additional instance when he makes contact. So you can actually do triple Cascade to the first spell you cast after you've hit somebody in the second main phase. I will note also that this spell says target player, so you can work some politics out with this thing to grant somebody a spell Cascade by giving them the mana to help cast it and the Cascade effect. So if you need somebody to be able to get something through, I don't know, counter spells or whatever, you can work out a deal with somebody to grant their board wipe some kind of Cascade effect. So then they have to have 2 counter spells to stop the board wipe or stop what's going on. Just remember, be careful, work out those deals well. Moving on to a blue-black card, let's look at the Cyber Controller. For X blue-black, you get a Cyberman legendary artifact creature that says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills X cards. Put all creature cards milled this way onto the battlefield face down under your control. They are 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and it is a 3/3. This card has my interest as a new commander, not actually slotting it into anything I already have existing, but as a build around. We don't often get cards that mill all of our opponents at once, and this has the bonus of stealing our opponent's milled creatures as it enters the battlefield to use as blockers or attackers as you set up the mill plan. So, you can go full on mill and keep all the black, blue mill stuff and ways to get the Cyber Controller back to your hand to replay and keep milling. The other option is an Artifact Creatures Matter deck, where the other stuff that you play, maybe some affinity for artifact stuff and other artifact creatures, and go artifact creature aggro, supplemented by the 2/2s that you get off of the Cyber Controller, which also leads me into the only artifact I really liked from this set, and that is Cyberman Patrol. For 2 colorless, you get an artifact creature Cyberman. Artifact creatures you control have Afflict 3, and it is a 2/2. So let's talk about a choice of damnations here. The Cyber Controller itself makes all those 2/2 Cybermen into 3/3s with its +1/+1 ability, and this will actually grant them Afflict 3 on top of that, messing with blocking. So they're going to have to take at least 3 damage with this thing out, nullifying any sort of chump blocking or big bottom blockers with higher toughness than power. And I love it for this. I want to try this build over the mill plan, and I may try both just to see what feels better. For the last card from the set that I like, we're going to do another build around. It's the Master Multiplied. For 4 black red, you get a Time Lord Rogue with Myriad. The legend rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control, and triggered abilities you control cannot cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control, and it's a 4/3. This is one of the many variations of the Master that were printed into the set. Of the variations, this was the one I found the most intriguing. Its own ability keeps the Myriad copies themselves from dying to the legend rule, and the last line also keeps those Myriad copies from being sacrificed at the end of turn and taken off the board. So you end up with multiple copies of this guy who can then copy himself again later. This just begs to be pushed, and I can see some just really crazy plays coming off of it. And the best part is, if you can get multiple instances of Myriad on one of these copies, or even the original copy, it'll trigger for each one of those instances of Myriad. In the case of this deck, if you wanted the Master Multiplied as the face of a deck, you would be using Blade of Selves. Equip it to the Master Multiplied, it would trigger the Myriad twice, giving you 6 tokens instead of the 3 you would get in a 4-player pod. Otherwise, this could do some serious shenanigans in a Mardu-colored scheme deck as part of the 99, which then net you access to Legion Loyalty to grant Myriad to all your creatures, as well as Duke Older Raven Guard could slot into the deck with its trigger targeting the Master, which would also give it haste the turn it comes into play to start doing its copying shenanigans. That's some deck brewing food for thought, and you can also have access to things like Anointed Procession to make additional copies of the tokens as well. So those are the cards I like from the Doctor Who set. I think I'm going to pick up these copies for my collection to kind of either build around or augment my current existing decks. Did you guys like some of the same cards, or do you like other cards? Let me know which ones you like down in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.